Let me just, I know, Mr. Simons, you touched on this whole issue of the cost and the competition creating. Could you explain in more detail why you believe that cutbacks to PEG support an appropriate response to these competitive pressures that we've been mentioning here? Aren't these alternatives to these PEG cutbacks that cable companies could have implemented? Finally, does there need to be a more level regulatory playing field between cable, telecom, and satellite companies, in your opinion?
Let me take each of those in order, Mr. Chairman. First, I wasn't trying to say that cutbacks in PEG were an appropriate response to changes in technology. What I was saying was the change in technology, the major change in technology that we're all facing across media platforms is from analog to digital. And that requires a lot of, I think, a lot of work among all the affected parties, the regulators, the service providers, the access community. And we're trying to do that. Obviously, it's difficult. But I think the response is not so much the change in PEG is not a response.
Excuse me. You did say in the testimony, in the few instances in which cable operators have cut back on PEG programming or funding lately, is to respond to the competitive pressures created by this regulatory disparity. And the other thing that gets people like me is whenever there is a problem where some people claim there's a cost involved, it's always certain people, certain programs, certain agencies that take the cut, and others do not. I mean, we're going to see this here. I mean, I assure you, and I don't want to get Mr. Kirk going again, I assure you that all these bailouts are going to work out to someone telling us a year or 2 years from now when we have a new president, whoever it is, that we can't fund education at the level we want to because we paid out money. Even though we're being told now it's not going to cost anything. It's going to cost, and you know who's going to feel the brunt of it. So why is it that, sure, there's competition and there's new digital costs and so on, but why is it that it's always, in this case, PEG that has to, you know, I don't see NBC4 New York or CBS complaining. I know they have their own cash, but the cable companies are not saying, boy, we've got problems, we're going to charge you more, whatever.
Well, I think there are two reasons. One is, and we've talked about this, the state law, many if not most of the state laws on franchising that have been passed in the last 18 months, 2 years, have reduced PEG requirements, I think for a variety of reasons, in part because there are other alternatives for local programming, in part because the state legislatures, for whatever reasons, decided to reduce those. My point to Congressman Visclosky was that the legislatures having decided to do that, Congress first having given to the local governments and the state governments the determination, the decision how to determine how much PEG there's going to be, the legislatures then decide to cut it back. My point was where we face competition from Verizon, AT&T, DirecTV, satellite, the rest, we need to stay competitive. And if the law is changed and the PEG requirements are reduced, then it's very difficult for us in a competitive marketplace to take on a greater cost, a greater burden on things that our competitors don't have. I think the second is the second issue, and I think we touched on this too in the first round, is this dispute over whether funding for PEG services that we provide, as opposed to capital costs, comes out of the 5% franchise fee or is over and above the 5% franchise fee. As I mentioned, we think the FCC got that right. Our companies have historically contributed above the 5% fee anyway, but those kind of contributions, again, become much more difficult when our competitors are not doing the same thing.
Let's move on to this related subject, but the issue of quality. And this is for all, if a franchising authority requires a cable provider to set aside channels for PEG use, do you believe that there is a federal requirement that those channels be made available in the same fashion and same technical quality as non-PEG channels? If so, what elements must be considered when determining if PEG channels are being provided in the same fashion and same technical quality? I'm not going to make comments about some of the shows that go on where, the folks are learning how to put on a show and the scenery falls and so on. I actually think that's kind of cool. Reminds me of the old Jack Benny show where the scenery fell behind you and so on. But sometimes the channels themselves, the quality coming through is not the same as the others. I'm not suggesting they all have to be in HD at this point, but is there a federal requirement, starting with the FCC, do you believe, to provide the same quality?
Well, there are certainly technical standards that are in place for the quality of what's what's on the signal and what's on the system, and so the programming that's on the system has to meet those technical standards.
When you say the programming, that's not speaking to the quality.
I'm sorry, that's what I meant, the technical quality. There are technical standards, specifically technical standards. I mean, what we...
Do you feel that they're being met, or you have to wait for a complaint?
Well, I would need to see the specific, the specific situation, and our engineers would have to evaluate. And the local franchising authority likely, or oftentimes has their own technical requirements as well. And then we've got requirements for the technical standards for what's shown over a cable system.
Separate and unequal doesn't cut it. We can spend years talking about this. If we're around in a couple of years and come back and tell you about all the more harm that's happened, I don't think it'll be a very happy day for the people. I appreciated your line of questioning on enforcement. How can this committee help light the fire behind this? Because what we're seeing is an abandonment of these channels, is an abandonment of quality in the best sense, which means the people count. So we're really looking to you, and Representative Schiff has left, but I mean, if this hearing doesn't represent having something before the FCC, then I must be missing something. So I would really beseech you to ask the FCC to put this up on their agenda much higher so that we don't see this gradual erosion and loss that, Representative Kirk, in Illinois, your constituents in a demo with AT&T were told you can fight it or you can embrace it. That's what we're being told. So we need some help with this, and we need not, and I'll file a complaint this afternoon. I have no issue with that. What else?
Cable companies don't degrade the quality of public access channels. We don't put them on VOD. You don't have to go through a menu to get them. Where we have disagreements, it's probably over where in the lineup you put them, what channel you put them on. Again, Mr. Nabi talks about the channel slamming. I think that's a little bit of a loaded term. We try to work with local communities and the access community to try to put these channels in a place where people can get them and educate people as to where the channels are when they've moved in a digital environment.